Hello everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us and for your interest in this presentation. I also hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy during these challenging times of COVID-19. My name is Untitled Chapter. I'm the Applications Manager at Biosero. Accompanying today is Steve Teston, our Integrations Manager. We will be discussing the consultative and collaborative approach that we take in the design of our integrated solutions. We will also elaborate upon how these strategies are essential to mitigating risk, which in turn ensures the efficient and successful delivery of our Green Button Go powered automated work cells to the customers. The needs of automation can be derived from a number of different reasons. It can be any or all of the following examples: the need to increase throughput, the need to improve robustness or quality of existing processes, or just simply to reduce tedious tasks that allow researchers and end users to focus their attention on more meaningful and essential processes, such as data analysis. The first step in our process is to meet with the customer. Here, not only validate the reasons for the desire to automate, but we also gather and discuss information on scientific and experimental procedures to be executed, the expected throughput for the work cell, identifying if there's any specific process workflows that need to be taken into consideration. Also assess if there's any future plans for the automated system. For example, will the workflow or throughput requirements change over time? Are there any plans to expand the platform? Are there any plans to incorporate additional instrumentation as needed? All of these topics can have an impact on Biosero's proposed solution and are definitely taken into consideration through collaborative discussions with the customer. From an experimental perspective, there may be customer preferences for the use of particular instrumentation in the automation workflow, as their protocols are already established and there is confidence in its performance. We try to accommodate preferred instrumentation by the customer as much as possible. If there is no preference, the application scientist will provide instrument recommendations for the system and go driver robustness, whether or not the instrument is the best fit for the process, and this can be based on its functionality, capabilities, and flexibility. However, as Biosero is hardware agnostic, we have a large, diverse library of instrument drivers. If an instrument driver is not already established, our talented team of software engineers are capable of developing one relatively quickly. Once the initial list of instruments has been determined, it is then reviewed with the customer to identify if there are any hardware and software challenges or obstacles for the project. The first assessment is always, is the instrument automation friendly? By this, the ability to successfully interact with the instrument on both a hardware and software level must be possible. Simply put, there must be 1. Communication with the instrument, 2. Access to instrument nests as needed. If there are any doors or covers restricting access to these nests, they must be able to open and close automatically for the robotic arm to properly interface with. Should a desired instrument not be able to fulfill these basic requirements, the identification of a suitable replacement is then needed before proceeding further with the design. Software considerations usually include, but are not limited to, 1. Driver development when it is needed. Biosero would obtain the application programming interface, or API, from the equipment manufacturer. The API allows the instrument driver to interact by sending commands to the instrument hardware, and also to send and receive information when requested by either the third-party software or the Green Button Go scheduler itself. 2. Assessment of driver functionality. Whether for new development or existing drivers, the API information is reviewed to ensure that the available commands through the Green Button Go driver is suited for the workflow requirements. And 3. Assessment of any possible requirements to connect to the LIMS and or databases and/or databases at any point in the workflow process to push-pull files and data. On the hardware side, this may be a review of custom engineering solutions needed to properly interact with laboratory instrumentation. For example, custom grippers may be needed to pick and place SBS labware to the plate nest due to its design. Example, the plate nest itself may be deeply recessed from the top or even the sides of the instrument shell. Also, there may be a need for custom engineering solutions to interact with non-SBS in the workflow. As you can see in this video, custom grippers and end effectors were designed and implemented for the movement, capping, and decapping of tubes or vials. And lastly, there may be a combination of hardware and throughput challenges. For instance, using the robotic arm to execute custom procedures such as the capping and decapping of vials does limit its ability to move other labware within the automated process. This has a significant impact on the system throughput. Discussing these bottlenecks with our customers not only ensure that there are no unexpected and disappointing surprises, but it also identifies the need to develop a solution to meet their requirements. If there are major concerns whether an existing design and its associated procedures of the automated work cell are able to meet the expectations, scientists will conduct a timing study of the intended workflow. The timing study is a simulation of the workflow based upon an agreed number of samples or time frame for testing. Collaborative determination of the time required for the completion of each step or instrument process of the workflow help to avoid any oversight of detail that can impact the accuracy of the simulation. By reviewing the timing study results, bottlenecks in the process workflow can be detected through measurables such as instrument utilization and process takt time. By being able to recognize these pinch points, simulations can be rerun with adjusted numbers of certain instrumentation to evaluate the improvement of the throughput. Once the equipment configuration that successfully achieves the workflow requirements are determined, the final stages of the design process are entered. Once the configuration of instrument types and their associated quantities to meet the required workflow are confirmed, the placement of these components within the work cell are then addressed. Taken into consideration are factors such as the physical space requirements of the facility which the system will be installed, accessibility to instrumentation for any routine service and maintenance, access to instruments by researchers for non-automation activities if it's required, such as walk-up operation, and the accessibility to the system to input samples for and remove samples from the work cell by its operators. This initial conceptual design is produced collaboratively with the customer and is usually finalized after a couple of revisions through feedback. Upon approval of the concept design by the render is then generated by the design engineer of the integrations team. The design engineer will have precise models of all the instrumentation on the system and will be able to double check that all plate nests will be reachable by the automation and robotics. Adjustments to the positioning and the layout of the system components may change accordingly from the conceptual design based upon this reach analysis. The formal render will also have accurate dimensions of the complete system, which can then be used for quote generation by the account manager and its subsequent sale. Once the design is purchased by the customer, the concept then becomes a project by which Biosero's integrations department picks up from. And with that said, I will now pass you off to Steve, who will enlighten you on the processes he has established within his team.
Thanks, Donald. My name is Steve Teston, Integrations Manager here at Biosero, and I'm going to cover our process of delivering automated work cells. At Biosero, we treat process as a product. We understand the importance of following a structured process with defined gates. The process is structured to mitigate risk and enable an efficient and complete installation. Each phase of the process has defined gates and deliverables, so even though our custom integrated solutions vary widely in function or complexity, the process allows us to treat them to a standard. This means we can accurately gauge progress, foresee potential issues, and continually improve and optimize the process. Although the integrations team is involved in the design and scoping of a process during the pre-sales process, once the purchase order comes in and the project becomes official, it is formally handed over to the integrations team from the applications and sales teams. The first step of the process is to have internal and external kickoff meetings. During the internal kickoff meeting, the different Biosero teams meet and discuss the project. We outline system requirements and timeline expectations. We also identify key stakeholders in the project and assign a project lead. The project lead is the Biosero team member who will handle the technical details on every step of the project from development through delivery and training. The project timelines are then managed by our PMO from a higher level. The last step of the internal kickoff is to hold a pre-mortem, which is where we will openly discuss potential risks in the project and how we will avoid them. Using our extensive history in projects, we have collected a significant knowledge base which includes troubleshooting instruments, working with certain technologies, implementing applications, and more. During the external kickoff meeting, the Biosero project team will meet with the customer and discuss the project timeline, review the stakeholders, and discuss the project and next steps. The project then moves on to the design phase. During this phase, we start by reviewing the system design and finalizing any small details that were excluded or simplified during the initial concept drawings. We then formalize the hardware design drawings so that they can be sent to manufacturer, such as the tables, mounting hardware, gripper fingers, etc. We then generate a design approval document for the customer so that they can verify everything is correct, and once it's been approved, we can order the hardware. A system specification document is also generated, which is the complete overview of the system requirements as ordered. Outlined in the document are utility requirements, application method description, installation information, etc. The purpose of this document is to collect all information regarding the requirements of the system and define a scope. Next, the factory acceptance testing and site acceptance testing documents are generated. These are documents that will act as a checklist while conducting the factory and site acceptance tests. All these documents are sent to the customer for approval and must be approved prior to conducting the factory acceptance test or shipping the system. During the procurement phase of the project, instruments and hardware are delivered intermittently. So as instruments arrive, we test them to ensure functionality. We call this testing the standalone operational acceptance test, SOAP. The SOAP verifies that the instrument received functions as expected. We also collect serial numbers, power and air requirements, software versions, feet size, nest dimensions, and more. We then store all this information in an instrument knowledge base so that we can refer to them later on future projects. The Green Button Go driver test is also conducted on these instruments as early as possible. During this test, the driver is validated on the instrument to ensure that the functionality and quality of life of the driver meets our standards and the customer's expectations. Although we see the same instruments over and over, their API or functionality may change over time, so it's important that we keep our drivers up to date and continually test them. In cases where we don't receive the instrument at all at our factory, we will attempt to test the instrument at the customer site or arrange access to a similar instrument at another site. In order to ensure a smooth installation, the testing of these instruments in advance is very important. As the tables and mounting hardware arrive, we begin mounting the instruments to the tables and wiring everything together. Our mounting hardware is designed so that an instrument can be removed and replaced without making adjustments to the hardware or teach points. This means when we teach the system in the factory, we generally can reteach the customer site in a fraction of the time. Also, the wiring is done so that the tables can be detached from one another and rolled directly into the lab, then simply reconnected without spending time rerouting cables, minimizing on-site installation time. Once everything is connected and the robot positions are taught, we test and optimize the system methods. If we don't have one or more of the instruments that will ultimately be used in the system, we can simulate them by using a plate nest in location of the instrument and then simulating its operation in Green Button Go. We then conduct the factory acceptance test, which the customer is invited to, although don't always need to attend. We also record this test on a video. During the test, we execute the system method and run through a checklist to ensure everything that was scoped is delivered. If deviations are identified, we can address them prior to site installation. This is critical as it allows the customer a chance to see the system in advance and gives a chance for some last-minute tweaks that will ultimately stall a system installation on site. Their overall objective here is to minimize the time at the customer site and to mitigate risk. When the tables are already prepared and the instruments are already tested, the system install is very quick. As mentioned during the factory build, the tables are rolled into the lab, connected and leveled. The instruments are placed onto the tables and configured, and the robot arm positions are retaught. If they were already taught in the factory, this is much more streamlined. The arm positions are then stress tested overnight if possible. The methods can be then revalidated, especially if new instruments are added. Any IT work is also conducted here, such as connecting to the customer's network or LIMS system. And finally, the site acceptance test is conducted, followed by customer training. Once a project has been completed, we conduct a post-mortem and lessons learned, in which we discuss any issue that arose and how we can prevent them in the future. We keep track of these, and they are brought up in future pre-mortems on other projects in the future. We then transfer the project to the service team, who will continue the support of the work cell, and should they need any additional support from the integrations team, they have access to all documentation throughout the project, as well as direct access to the project lead and the team. Thank you for your time today. We'll now open up to any questions.